better never ends. In health, in performance, no matter your starting point, you can always strive for better. My name's Charlie Goodchild, I'm your host, and this is the Better Never Ends podcast. We've made it our mission to share with you the expertise and wisdom of role models and leading experts in their field, teaching us about how we can be better, telling stories about their journey to better, and inspiring you to discover yours.
Today we are welcoming back, and welcoming back feels special, by the way, because it is our first returning guest. We are welcoming back Ben Steele-Turner. Ben is multi-talented. He's going to struggle with this. I can tell already. He's getting embarrassed. But Ben is a physiotherapist. He's also has a special interest within nutrition, having done a master's in human nutrition. He's now studying for a PhD, looking at the impact of nutrition and weight management with osteoarthritis. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you so much. And having just been told I'm the first returning guest, it's quite an honour. Yeah.
And the reason why it's particularly special is because when we did our first episode, it wasn't quite the first one we released, but the first one we recorded was with you. So this was back in the days when we used to be called The Health Space.
In your spare room?
It was in my spare room, yeah. It was in those very strange days just after the COVID lockdown, the first COVID lockdown, when we were suddenly allowed to see people, but only for a couple of months. And we used that window wisely. We brought you into the podcast studio / my spare room, and we recorded an episode on nutrition and supplements. And that was a real learning curve for us. I was just laughing to you then, wasn't I? Joking, saying how it took me 4 to 5 hours to edit that episode because we made a few mistakes. But thankfully things have stepped up. We're now in our very own studio. We've got proper podcast set up, and you're coming back to witness it. So what an honour.
Yeah. I know the podcast is called Better, and we're having, now here, 4 years later, it is a lot better. Yes. So this is great. It's really cool to see the evolution.
Yeah. And the reason we brought you back is because you listened to our podcast, so thank you for listening.
Do.
And you picked up on one of the comments made with the episode with Danny Lai. And with Danny Lai, we spoke about this difference between weight management and weight loss.
Yeah.
And you picked up on it and posted about it. And we started exchanging messages again. And we decided actually it would be a good topic to expand on. So with Danny, we covered it as one of the subjects, but today we want to cover it throughout the whole episode. So today's episode is going to be about weight management and weight loss. Yeah. Let's start us off, please. What is the difference between weight management and weight loss?
Yeah, so they are just two different terms, right? How I would view it, weight loss is just dropping your weight. Your Earth's gravity's effect on you is going down. How I would view it is looking at it as a line graph over your life, where on the x-axis is time, on the y-axis is your weight. Weight loss is just a decline, so that line going down. Weight management is looking over a longer period, maybe taking a slight step back and saying, right, where is my line now? What are the effects of the trajectory of that line going up? What's making it go down? What could I change to make it go up or make it go down, or stop it going up or stop it going down? That's how I'd view weight management.
And I think the interesting part that I now understand is what seems so clear to me all of a sudden is that no one really has a problem with weight loss, or at least not many people. There's not many people who haven't lost weight at some point in their life. What people seem to struggle most with is maintaining that weight loss into a healthy weight limit. Yeah. And what's the importance of weight management then in that scenario? Why is it important that we're able to manage weight?
Yeah, just because while weight loss might be a short period, when we look over years or decades of one person's life journey, if let's say they were at an unhealthily high weight and they've dropped down to a healthy weight, but they only maintained it for 12 weeks, 6 months, whatever, and then they went back up. Well, just like in the stock market can crash and it can go way down and look really, look drastically change. You zoom out on the slider and actually it's a tiny little blip. So being able to keep your body at a healthy weight for you based on umpteen different factors over a long period of time, like on that x-axis, that long period, I think that's where your body wants to be in homeostasis. It doesn't want to be yo-yoing up and down, constantly fluctuating, likes a nice stable environment.
And I think that's a good entry point into the podcast today. But what I think would be nice to hear is, why do you care?
Why do I care?
So why does it matter to you as a physio or as a human, as someone who's interested within human nutrition and having studied a lot?
Yeah.
What's prompted you to take this on as a PhD topic?
Initially, going back to when I was studying physio, at the same time I was doing bodybuilding competitions. So I was really interested in the nutrition. And my first observation was how if someone was going and seeing an S&C coach or a personal trainer, they would be trying to gain muscle, increased power, speed, endurance. And alongside all the physical elements, there would be, right, nutrition-wise, this is what you need to do. Someone has ACL reconstruction, you want to increase power, hypertrophy, muscular endurance, and not a single physio that I could see was clocking, right, well, how much protein are you actually getting? So that was what led me to the nutrition. Then after doing the masters in nutrition and then practicing, just became really aware. I know we'll touch on it later probably with osteoarthritis. As a physio primarily, that's a presentation we see a lot of. It's very common. A lot of people in the UK and worldwide have symptomatic osteoarthritis. And it just, both from, well, firstly my experience, then read it up, and in the literature, this is a really clear and recurrent evidence to practice gap where people who are living with overweight or obesity are being diagnosed with osteoarthritis and they're not getting that support. So I was really passionate about, right, how can we help improve? And one way of doing that is to help contribute to the evidence, and that is through doing the PhD.
Yeah, super interesting, because there's not going to be a huge amount of physios that are out there looking into this literature and pushing the boundaries like you are. But one of the things I've always wondered about is that PhDs are about honing in on a single subject and knowing lots and lots and lots of becoming super specialists within that area. Yeah. But actually you're coming in with this breadth of knowledge, physio, nutrition, bodybuilding, and I sense that has a better practical application as a result, because you're applying it across these different fields. So I'm really interested to see what comes of it. And I know that you're sort of halfway through and in the midst of it. Yeah. But that's a really interesting way of turning your passion for learning and your physio expertise, but also this nutritional expertise, into something that's got a real practical take home.
Yeah. Well, I'm a year in. I started as a professional doctorate. I've switched to PhD. There's minute academic differences, but big research project. I love it. I could, talk until the battery on these microphones has more than run out about it. I just love it. It's fantastic. It's such a great learning experience. And the more I read into it, the more I'm becoming passionate of, wow, weight management in healthcare, traditional healthcare, doctors, physios, surgeons. If we can upskill as a whole profession, a whole industry in weight management, of course, I'm highly biased, but I can't see how that wouldn't lead to a positive effect on society.
Yeah. So what is this positive effect on society then? Let's start on general health. What is the impact of having, as a population, reducing our average weight?
Yeah, well, at societal levels, reduced spending on healthcare, people having better quality of life. The list of health complications that you're at increased risk for if you are living with overweight or obesity is, I believe, 200 plus from numbers I've heard. So less spending on healthcare, people more active, living longer. So for a society, I don't see what detriments there can be for improving our societal management of healthcare, and the aspect that I guess I'm hopefully helping to contribute to is within physios, that is within healthcare provision.
But let's be clear here. Whose fault is this? Right? It's a difficult question, but also I think it's an important one to cover, because I think the blame, and I know that you feel quite strongly about this, I think the blame gets shifted in the wrong direction.
Yeah. So many factors, but we live in a a rapidly changed, if we were to have this conversation we couldn't have this conversation 100 years ago, not just because of the equipment needed to record this, but the technology and transport that we both used to get here. It would have been a 2-day. Well, I looked on Google Maps yesterday before coming here and accidentally pressed on walking distance, and it was a 2-day walk from my house to here, right? So if we had this conversation 100 years ago, my calorie expenditure to get here, I would have left it. My calorie, I wouldn't have known that because I wouldn't have had Google Maps to look up anyway. But so as a society, there's a lot of input factors. So physically, we live in a world where you can absolutely, your body just wants to survive, and it lives in a world where it has to do very little, and it's still warm, you've got enough food, water, shelter, but there's no physical activity expenditure for that. And then the food that is regularly on offer is highly palatable, is incredibly convenient and easy to get. It's probably promoting the societal issue of increased weight. And I mean, there's so much talk about the obesogenic environment at the moment. So as an individual, it's one thing that I would say to my patients when we're discussing weight management is we're living in the world that it is the odds are stacked against you in order to, not increase weight. And for many people, it's not their fault. If you got the same genome from a person who lived in 10,000 BC and put them in today's world, they would be exposed to the same inputs that are causing the obesity epidemic at the moment.
Yeah, we're ultimately genetically pre-programmed to consume these hyper-palatable foods when they're on offer, because they didn't come on offer very often.
Yeah.
And when they did, we were supposed to consume them as much as we could, gorge on it and just keep eating and eating to essentially save for a rainy day. Whereas unfortunately now, as you said, the access is there.
Never is the rainy day.
The rainy day isn't there. You've got this access. We've got this easy access. We've got a genetic system which is designed to protect and store fat, and we've got a society which is making money out of providing these foods, and it's much easier to store foods when it has got additives in and various other preservatives that again make it less nutritionally valuable for us. So there's lots of factors involved, and again, I like that term of obesogenic environment, because that takes it away from the individual. They're just doing what they are programmed to do, and it puts it back into society's realm of how we're going to solve this as a society.
Yeah.
However, you're still going to have an individual come in potentially and say, I would like, or maybe they come to realize through conversations with you, or they come to you with the decision I want to lose some weight and I want to get healthy again. So once that person's decided they want to swim upstream, because ultimately that's what it is, they're going to swim upstream, it's harder. How do they get better at swimming upstream as an individual now?
Yeah, so that's where I think often in a lot of conversations I've had, people get so, if we're going down the river analogy, but they drown in this is society's problem and marketing of foods and ultra processed foods and all this. But for most people, society can change that, but individual decides, right, I'm going to swim against the current. The first thing that a good swimmer would know is, right, I am swimming against the current, so it is going to be increased effort. So that knowledge is power. Straight away, right, I know I'm fighting against it. So understanding what are those factors that are feeding into the obesogenic environment, right? So lower physical activity, so we can take elevators, escalators, decentralizing transport, so you don't have to walk as much. So we can make a conscious decision to be more physically active, and I think most people would get that. With the dietary side of things, it is such a complicated realm. Quite a nice the cognitive cue thought piece that I would recommend to people is, often when you're eating food, to consider, when this food was made, was this grown or lived, or was this food, or was this a product that is made to boost the bank balance of something or someone? And oftentimes where there's people will complain, shrinkflation, I'm paying the same amount, but the amount that's in the packet has gone down. Well, that's because the purpose of that product is to drive to drive profit for a company. Therefore, they are likely to use lower quality ingredient stuff that's cheaper, stuff that is potentially feeding into that obesogenic environment for you. So if you're deciding to swim upstream, be aware it is upstream. Put yourself in positions where you can be more physically active. The eating part of it, like, it is tough, and some people are more susceptible than others. But really considering, is this food or is this a product that's been made in order to drive profits?
And the differentiation you're making there is the difference between natural food and ultra processed food.
Yes.
And could you, because this is actually something I'm not entirely sure of, what's the difference between processed food and ultra processed food?
Yeah. So a lot of people are very anti. My view, there are many positives to ultra processed foods, right? If you're celiac, ultra processed foods and the removal of gluten is an absolute life changing positive. For baby formula. Space food, astronauts food, they're eating non-stop ultra processed food. So ultra processed food isn't a bad thing in itself. It's when the diet is too much ultra processed. But to go back to your question, think of it as a continuum. So it's not like a pendulum that's just swung one way or the other. You have whole foods. As soon as something is changed, it starts going down that processing continuum, and ultra processed is where it's. I'm not personally aware of if there's a distinct, like, right there is the cutoff on the continuum where that ultra gets added, but it's so far down that continuum that it's barely recognizable from the initial constituent.
Yeah. Well, could we use the example of oats here? So it comes from the ground. Yeah. It then gets mildly processed to be able, like rolled oats, for example. Yeah. It's produced into an ability to like have it as a really healthy food, but that's processed technically, right?
Still processed.
But then you break it down even further and add it to something else, and that helps to turn it into something that's ultra processed, and you can no longer recognize it as an oat.
Yeah. So processing like that is not bad, or using a pestle and mortar and grinding up some herbs and spices, that's food processing.
Yeah, got it.
But the oat example, well, then you might eat them as rolled oats. They're processed, they're from what they were, but then suddenly they get added into a big bowl and mixed with syrup and sugars and preservatives and chopped into a flapjack. That's then ultra processed. But I couldn't say, the exact, someone may be able to, but I'm personally not sure what the criteria of when does that go from processed to highly processed to ultra processed. Yeah. I'm not sure.
But I think that splits it nicely enough. And then look, we're talking about quality here and food quality then. So if we're saying that it's better to try and eat food in general, or that in its original form or close to its original form. Yeah. How important is that versus the amount of calories that we're consuming?
Yeah. This is one I've grappled with for a while. If the variable you are trying to change is weight, then calories is the most important variable, metric, whatever, because you can't, so the first law of thermodynamics, energy can't be created or destroyed, it's only transition, right? So if there is energy coming in the form of food, you either have to store it, some as glycogen, some as adipose tissue, or use it. One thing, and I have not yet found an answer, is if you were to eat, let's say your basal metabolic rate and was 2,000 calories and you weren't doing any extra activity, and you were to eat 2,300 calories worth of lettuce every day, other than having probably the most painful stomachache ever, one thing I'm not certain is, would you still put on weight, or by that point would you have done so much chewing, so much digesting, that actually then the scale would have tipped? But then of course, by the time the scale tips, that extra expenditure that's gone into digesting it means actually you are still in a calorie surplus. The way the food quality, from my understanding and all the research and reading and studying I've done, is that the high processed foods are very, very calorie dense and very nutrient sparse. So you're getting a lot of these calories which are shooting it up. They've often got additives or sugars in that then spike your appetite for more. So either way, you're saying, oh, well, that means that it's the lower quality food, but the undermining continual factor is you are still getting more calories, right? So while it's not the be all and end all, we've just gone for a 2-minute roundabout, it still comes down to primary is, if weight management is the variable, calories in is important, but a close second, I'm pretty confident, is food quality. Having high quality foods is still very important. If you were to have a very low calorie of very poor quality food, you would still lose weight. Metabolically, you might be unhealthy, you'll be deficient in nutrients and minerals, but if the variable is weight, it's going to go down.
And what it seems to be then is that even though calories are the ultimate aim for changing weight one way or the other, a good way of achieving that is through more whole foods, avoiding the ultra processed foods, in order to get the less density of calories and therefore more satiating calories in. So you feel fuller quicker, you get the nutrients in you need. So ultimately that's probably the solution. Yeah. And I guess that almost makes sense with these kind of big diet fads where people do lose weight by doing some form of essentially fasting, where they're having hardly anything, like cabbage soup or whatever it might be. Yeah. But it's so hard to maintain, and they probably feel like absolute garbage, that it's just not sustainable, and therefore they yo-yo up and down.
Yeah. Yeah. The underlying mechanism of all of the fad diets that have come and gone is still calorie deficit, right? That's still the underlying fad. There are, and it's probably worth mentioning, there are times where generally I'm fearful of solutions that are so calories in, calories out is an example of a time where you give this very blanket, like almost like universal rule, calories in, calories out. And then there is a subset of people that might be in a huge calorie deficit and not be losing weight if there's certain hormonal changes, or they're on steroid medication or hypothyroidism, and then their hormones are working against them. So while we're having this conversation, I do like to always add the caveat that when we're talking about people's health, and got to be sensitive of that, always finishing conversation with this blanket calories in, calories out. There'll be some people who then might genuinely be in a calorie deficit and still struggling to lose weight for one of the aforementioned factors, and then not be for a while, and then lose heart. So as we're talking about society, I'd like to mention that as well.
Individual differences. So what about that person then? That person whose hormones are working against them when it comes to their weight. So those people who find it really hard, they are in a deficit. Is it a case of the deficit for that person needs to be more aggressive, or actually is there actually medical solutions to that to put them in a better position?
Yeah, so there's inter-individual differences in lipid turnover, fat turnover. So some people will find it easier to lose weight, and vice versa. So it may, if the commonly promoted message on social media is when someone says, I'm in a calorie deficit and I'm not losing weight, the person on social media goes, no, you're not, you're lying. And the literature says generally people underreport what they eat. So if it's a case where someone truly is in a very stark calorie deficit and they're not losing weight, if that's the case, it's probably not hugely common, but when it is common, I would say that would be some medical input should be advisable, because if you had a 70 kilogram male who was eating 800 calories a day and they had been for a number of weeks or months and they weren't losing weight, I would be querying why. So that would be when I would want a medical opinion.
And one of the things I've heard spoken a lot about recently when it comes to weight loss and diet is about fiber.
Yeah.
Fiber intake. It seems to be something that's, I mean, it's always been on the back of a packet.
Yeah.
Right? So we've always known that it's relevant to talk about in some way or another.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm hearing it spoken in health terms much more in the last few years. So what's fiber got to do with everything?
Yeah, fiber's so important. I'd say if I could summarize my 12-month MSc in human nutrition down into 2 sentences, it would be eat more fiber and oily fish, probably would be like my takeaway. Fiber's the non-digestible carbohydrates. So carbohydrates that your body doesn't fully digest. This is the food, the fuel for all the colonocytes, so all the gut microbiota in your gut. In terms of weight specifically, there was a Resolve trial published 2020. I think there was 100 odd participants. They did this 3-week residential, very strict weight loss health kick, and then a year of following those people up to see what they could maintain. And fiber was the only nutrient that was significantly linked with health outcomes, things like that. There was a another review in the last couple of years, narrative review, but in Nutrients High Impact Journal, and basically discussing how fiber could impact weight and all the different studies that have been done. If we're talking about fiber specifically with weight on the as the variable, probably minimal difference, but it's one of those where if you are having a low quality diet generally, it's probably not much fiber in. So if you start to do things that would lead to weight loss, more whole foods, less very calorie dense foods, your fiber will go up. So I don't think physiologically there's a huge reason as to why is it that fiber is helpful at reducing weight. But in terms of it's another metric that ticks up. If you're doing the things that are leading to weight loss, fiber's going to go up. But completely separate to that, for cardiometabolic health, colon cancer, gastrointestinal health, fiber is fundamental. UK guidance, 30 grams a day, and that's tough to get to. 30 grams of fiber a day is not something you're just going to leisurely jog to.
Talk me through 30 grams a day.
Oh, it's
fiber.
Bowl of oats for breakfast, banana, a banana as a snack, apple. You'd have to have a lunch that takes in some kind of fiber. Salad, you're going to get some fiber from the all the greens. High fiber dinner, sweet potato with or baked potato with skin on. You might, if you do, basically if you prioritize fiber at all 3 meals plus a snack, you'll probably get to 30 with some additions, some seeds, nuts. So it's not something that you probably wouldn't get to it by accident regularly.
And once the food is processed, increasingly, what happens to the fiber content?
Reducing the fiber, right? Because the fiber's indigestible. It's bulking the food up, but the classic ultra processed, highly palatable food is getting rid of the fibrous stuff for the, take it back, the OG ultra processed food and sugar, right, is from sugar beet or sugar cane, which is massive, and then taking it down to this little teaspoon that's super sweet. And if you'd sat and spent all day chewing through the sugar cane, probably wouldn't be very nice, but you would have got an awful lot of fiber alongside that faster acting sugar. So within a more complex scenario of ultra processed foods, that fiber's getting eaten away. Obviously, there are lots of processed foods that are then backtracking and then they're adding fiber back in. So lots of marketing you'll see on bars will say high fiber when they hit X, the threshold that they have to reach to claim it's high fiber or whatever. Yeah.
that sounds a messy enough world to me. The fact that there is a kind of a quota that they have to meet, and they are now understanding people care about it, and therefore adding it in after having removed it in the first place.
Yeah,
a backwards way of doing it. But that's the world we live in. That fiber question you were saying there, because look, my understanding there as well is that fruit works the same way. So fruit has got real high levels of fructose. Yeah. But when you eat it in its original form, it doesn't impact your health or doesn't impact your metabolism in the same way as having squashed it down into a fruit juice. So are we doing the same concept? Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. If the overarching theme, particularly for this conversation as well, is societal situation and messaging of weight management, taking it back to that, one thing that's always frustrated me is you go, right, someone's decided to swim upstream. Oh, okay, right, now I'll tell you what, I'm going to increase my fruit. And then suddenly you see online, don't eat fruit because it's high in fructose. It's like, if that was me swimming and you're already swimming upstream, and one of the first things is, right, I'm going to increase fruit and veggies, and then someone pops up and says, oh, don't eat fruit because it's high fructose, that's like suddenly hitting a waterfall that sends you backwards, right?
Someone's throwing stones at you on the side.
Exactly, yeah. So the simple thing is, exactly, you're right. Obviously, some fruits are higher in sugar compared to the fibrous or the non-sugar carbohydrates than others. But in essence, it's exactly right. You take an orange juice, it's 80 odd percent water, then fibrous material, and then some sugar. Orange juice is getting rid of a lot of the fibrous material to end up with something that's relatively high in sugar. It still doesn't make it inherently a bad thing. It just means it's higher in sugar, and that could have X, Y, and Z effects. The exact point. Fruit, you get some sugar, you get some fiber, you get a load of micronutrients. You take all of that out, you will just have the sugar.
I guess this is where the messaging of avoiding ultra processed foods actually makes a lot of sense, because that's what we're dealing with here. It's just that processing is taking away the good and leaving the bad, whereas when the good is still there, it's an overall good. The food in its natural natural form.
Some nuance, I guess, with like preparation of some vegetables, different processing, sometimes it's less good. So if you boil vegetables for too long, that's going to denature some of the micronutrients and the vitamins, which are healthy, but then for some of them, actually, it boosts their availability and differences. So actually, when it comes to vegetable intake, let's say you're going to have peas every day of the week, it actually wouldn't be a bad idea to have 2 days where you have them raw and you eat them from the pod, 2 days where you microwave them, 2 days where you steam them or boil them. So you're actually getting a varied interest.
So every now and again, I should go round to my mother-in-law who cooks her cabbage for about half an hour. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, once in a while. But then you would get all the social benefits of going around and everything, which would...
Yeah, sure. Look, it's a really interesting world that we're talking about there. That same vegetable can have different effects and different benefits depending on its processing.
Yeah.
In cooking, let's say, depending on how you cook it. So I'm not sure I was aware of that, how different it can be based on that. So you're not just recommending a variety of foods and plants, you're actually saying variety of cooking methods of foods and plants.
It's good also because it changes the nutrient composition of it.
So if we're trying to design a plan for the person in front of us who started their journey swimming upstream, and we want to stop throwing stones at them, we want to actually give them some kind of buoyancy aid, what are we going to do? How are we going to make that journey easier for them?
It is really tough. The first point is, and this is the physio in me that's saying this, is understanding what's made them jump into the stream. So where have they come from? What's been their diet history? This is often in healthcare, we'll use physio as examples. We're both physios. Someone comes to physio, we spend an awful long time and pride ourselves on the time and depth we go into with our initial assessment, looking at tests, making objective measurements, and we use all of that to come to a advice. Oftentimes with weight loss management, dietary advice, guidance, people just dive in with their guidance, go, oh, in order to lose weight, you should do this, this, this. And that's like a physio walking up and go, oh, in order to get your knee better, you should do this. You'd be like, well, hang on, where's the assessment been? So the first thing, so this would be, if we're talking to clinicians and to people or patients, is, right, understand exactly why I've decided to start going against the stream. What did I try before? Did it work? Did it not work? What maybe was good? What maybe was better? The person that's going to be of the most help is the presence of someone who is helpful, or a support group. So although it's short term, people that go to weight management, weight loss groups lose weight because they're swimming upstream and they've got a whole group of people even in the lanes next to them, and they've got someone stood on the bank, all doing it together. So they lose weight, but then the problem is they lose their weight, they stop going, and the people that they were swimming with get out and go off their separate ways, and the person that was giving them that support stood on the riverbank has gone because they're not going anymore, and so the current starts drifting them back down, so they're ending up, often it's termed a yo-yo, but now we're going down, we are rolling with this river analogy. So having someone or a group there to help is the key things, and taking things gradual. So if you suddenly flip everything on its head, so you look at someone's physical activity and their diet and you change everything, it is not going to be sustainable. So to start with, I may speak to someone, we'll spend an hour or an hour and a half chatting through what they've tried before, diet history, anything. Actually, do you know what? To start with, we're just going to absolutely nail breakfast, right? Because this is the common, seems to always, 3 or 4 times in our conversation in the last hour or so, you've mentioned how breakfast is normally this, or then it gets skipped. So let's just spend the next couple of weeks just absolutely nailing that, getting that prepped. So you've got a healthy option, whether you prep it the night before, what have you, something like that. And then we'll catch up then. And then once breakfast is done, okay, when else is important? Well, we know dinner is family time, and that's when kids are there, husband or wife are there. So we don't really want to change that. So what about lunch? Then go through lunch, change that. So the key thing is if they are swimming up that river, you're not looking at the mountain that's 10 miles away in the distance. You're just taking it stroke by stroke. That would be kind of the next. So my first 2 buoyancy aids would be physically someone being there to help, which is a coach or a weight management support group or dietitian, nutritionist, whoever. And then making sure that you're not straight away pointing in the distance and going, off you go. That's where we're going. Everything changes now. Just right, that tree, we're just going to do this to get to that tree. And then we'll catch up at that tree, and then we'll chat about how we get to the next tree, would be my advice.
I've heard a lot of the Olympians, we're currently in the middle of the Paris Olympics. I've heard a lot of the Olympians talking a lot about process, like way more than I've ever heard. There's clearly been some kind of Team GB message that says, we're going through a process, this is what we're doing. It's not about the goal and the destination, it's the process. So clearly it's working for them in performance terms to understand that the process is what they focus on, and it helps them kind of stay short term, step by step. What other parts of the process do you think people should be aware of? And on the other hand, if they're not looking really at the top of the mountain, does looking at their weight regularly help or hinder?
I think probably individual. It would it probably can be both. And if someone's on their own and they've got no one to bounce things off of, and you look at your weight and suddenly it's gone backwards, and you have your weight has not gone in the way you want it to go, then that would be disheartening. But as long as you're tracking it out and understanding it's over a long distance, it would still be useful. So having someone to support, making small changes at a time, setting themselves up for success. So the little rules you would set yourself. Let's say they get the train to work, they live 5 minutes from the train station, but you actually, if you were to leave 15 minutes earlier, you're going to walk 1 mile and get on the train station 1 step closer. And that's all we're going to change. You're just going to do that for a month, right? Unless it's absolutely pouring with rain. So you might have met someone, you might have changed their breakfast. So we set them up for success. We make sure that's prepped. We make sure that that then becomes autonomous, like stages of learning, right? So at first it will take them effort and time to think about, all right, well, I need that breakfast. What do I like? What doesn't like? What do I need to buy and have it ready? And then once that box is checked and that's taking up the kind of cognitive effort, then the next part, right, what we're going to do, we're going to walk 1 mile closer to work and get on the train station there. And then if you do the same on the way back, that's going to add 4,000 steps a day. That adds your calorie burn up. And then that might be the next layer. So then looking at the physical activity. The other parts of the process, this might sound bad. The diet and the physical activity are, inverted commas, easy to change, right? Make your diet better, move more. But then beyond that, it starts coming. It's then where other aspects of the environment we live in come in, because then we go, oh, right, well, beyond that, if then they've got other commitments, right? Well, I have to go to work, so I need to pay my mortgage, or I need to support my kids. So I can make my diet a bit better, and I can do a bit more about activity. But beyond that, someone go, well, I can't go to the gym 3 times for an hour a week because that's when I got to look after my kids. And so that's just a non-negotiable change. So then you'd have to try and change the processes as much within their confines. So being more prepped, pushing that further. And that's where it becomes super individual. So it's hard to talk about we'd need a case study.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
You mentioned exercise there then as like something that's an important change.
Yeah.
How important is exercise in weight loss versus weight management?
Really important. And I know probably every different ratio has been banded about of like, oh, it's 90-10, 90% eating, 10% what you do. If we go back to that law of thermodynamics, if you were to sit around, your body's still burning energy, thinking, digesting, breathing, you're burning calories. So you can, and people who are, unfortunately, if you're in ITU, high dependency unit or intensive care, you're not really doing anything, but probably taking in very, very little nutrition and losing a lot of weight. So you absolutely, if weight is the variable we're talking about, you can lose weight and not do any physical activity. So then that adds on the layer of body composition and go, right, well, we know if you lose weight, we want to do the exercise, not just for the weight, but for all the umpteen different benefits there are of physical activity and exercise. So it's another lever we can pull by saying we can do more activity. Another layer of nuance would be then there's quite a strong suggestion that if you do a high bout of physical activity, let's say first thing in the morning, for a lot of people that just dials down their non-exercise activity later in the day, and then they actually end up at a net neutral compared to the people that didn't do the physical activity before.
So is this why I'm hearing a lot of people really celebrate that non-exercise activity, for example, walking? So you were saying earlier about walking as part of your transport instead of, e-scooters are bloody everywhere at the moment. I feel like they're another thing that's making it harder for the world. But instead of making those choices, it's the non-exercise activity. That sounds like what you're saying there is that, exercise is great, but don't let it reduce your normal movements that you're going to be doing.
Yeah. As well. I would probably truly sit in the camp of variety is key. And if for weight management, that graph over a long time, the vary of inputs is the best. So if we were to go down that mantra, you could end up saying, oh, well, I'll never do high intensity exercise or physical lifting. Like you mentioned, the Paris Olympics, amazing athletes who have become absolutely the peak of pinnacle performance in their thing, right? So cyclists, their bodies are built, like morphed into these phenomenally impressive cycling machines. But for most people who aren't going for that level of cycling, then you'd want to say, well, we're walking to provide one stimulus, we're going to do some weightlifting to provide different stimulus, we're going to do some mobility work to provide different stimulus. So constantly reminding every little aspect of your body, I need a bit of strength, I need a bit of movement, So I would say variety is key, but moving your body, however that may be, if for weight management, get moving 100%.
And exercise often increases appetite for a good reason. You burn calories, there's a protective mechanism there to refuel and restore those calories. That could be hard for someone, right? They're exercising for the right reasons, but then appetite spikes and quite naturally you're going to want to eat, so you then eat. Does that matter in that situation? Is there anything are there any tips you have for people who find that? Because I definitely do, by the way. When I exercise, I end up eating loads because I feel really hungry after having exercised.
Yeah. That's one of the tough parts of this upstream travel. So there's the first part, which is if you've done a load of exercise, the soft, you do need to fuel. If you're then excessively fueling, or all you're doing then, we take that right back to 20 minutes ago with the energy balance, right? Let's say you do a big bout of exercise, you burn 400 or 500 calories, and then you eat 700 calories. We're right back to the energy balance question, that maybe there was no point doing that. If weight loss is the goal, if we're talking overall about weight management, well, actually, if you're training, if you're stood on your hypertrophy line on the graph and you go, actually, for me, for my weight management, I quite like it to divert up a little bit, then you'd be right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess it also depends on what your purpose is for the training as well, right? Because I actually had this conversation with my wife recently, because she's running for the first time ever in her life, and she's enjoying that. She's enjoying getting faster, but she's also trying to lose a bit of weight at the same time. And I've had to remind her a few times, like, you can't really do both very well. You can't get faster at running and lose weight. That's a recipe for disaster. You're either going to get injured or end up with some kind of energy deficiency problem. So prioritizing would be how I would come to it. Decide what you want to do best, and then the other one, just, it might happen a bit, but it won't happen quite as much as you want it to.
Yeah, that's the pinnacle that you're describing there, where people would want to be losing body fat and building muscle and improving performance.
Yeah.
And that's, never say never. I'm sure it's possible, but if you are training loads and you are training to perform, you want your body to perform, you need to provide the energy and the nutrients. If you want to manage your weight and you want it to go up, then you would need to provide excess. If you're managing your weight and you want it to go down, there needs to be some form of surplus, right? I suppose the slight nuance add to that then would be, if we're weight management, and the goal is to put on weight to perform more, we're aiming for more muscle, lean, fat-free mass, whatever you want to call it, lean tissue. So whereas if we're trying to lose weight, we're probably trying to lose fat, but then you also want to maintain as much muscle as you can, because we know when people lose weight, they always lose muscle as well. Yeah. One issue with yo-yo diets is you start with X amount of fat and X amount of muscle, and then you lose a load of weight and you lose a load of fat, but you also lose a bit of muscle as well. And then slowly over time, if you're not training or whatever, and you don't provide your body with that stimulus, your fat goes back up, And so you end up back where you were, and then you go, oh, I really need to lose weight again. And so your weight comes down, and then your muscle weaks down a little bit.
So you've got this net.
And so then over time, each time your fat's changing more, but the net is your muscles probably stepping down a little bit each peak and trough.
So two things from that. The first thing, can strength and resistance training mitigate that?
To a huge degree. I couldn't see why not, because your stimulus is, we need to, your body's like, right, I need to maintain the muscle to push this weight. So it's going to prioritize that.
So the anabolic, that kind of muscle growing nature of the strength training will mitigate from that loss. The second part brings us on to more age-related change then. So it is a fact that as we get older, we are going to lose some muscle mass. It is also a fact that on average, we gain overall body weight as we get older. How much of that is a fact based on our lifestyle, and how much of that is a fact based on age-related change?
Yeah, so really, really interesting. And my thinking of it kind of is weird as people kind of come out of their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they go, oh, you put on weight, dad bod, going to get bigger. And then when you get into late 70s, 80s, 90s, everyone's worried about frailty. So in terms of putting on weight, we know that your turnover, just like any part of your body, right? Constant turnover. Fat cells, adipose cells, no difference. So fascinating study. The lead author, Patrick Arne, Sweden, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, apologies if not. They used 14 carbon isotopes. Have you heard of that?
No.
So nuclear bomb testing during the Cold War, 1950s to 1963. You're looking at me like I've gone very off track.
I'm actually really interested in the Cold War. So.
Yeah, right. So
we're probably not going to go down that rabbit hole as far as but anyway.
Right. So late 50s, early 60s, during the Cold War, countries were doing above ground nuclear testing. And this meant that there's a specific carbon isotope, carbon-14, that became very abundant in the atmosphere. And that got incorporated into living organisms. For thousands of years prior to that, carbon-14 at very stable atmospheric levels. These researchers in Sweden took a cohort of people and tracked the ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12, which is at a different ratio in fat cells, and measured it over, I think it's over 16 years. And they could see, so they could basically tell the age of the adipose tissue of the fat cell based on the ratio and matching it up to the known carbon-14 atmospheric level at the time. And so they could see that as people got older, their turnover slowed down. So the adipose tissue was older. So your body's very good at getting rid of removing lipids and stuff when you're younger, and that slows down. Completely off topic, but very interesting. It's the same way we know how tendons grow, through carbon-14. So they took Heinmeier 2013. This was in the US. They took cadavers, so people who donated their body to science, and then measured the carbon-14 that was in their Achilles tendon, in the core of their Achilles tendon, and the amount of carbon-14 matched up with the atmospheric levels of carbon-14 in their first 17, 18 years of life. So that's why the whole idea that Achilles or tendons grow like rings of a tree, and whereas muscle is gone. So if they then died when they were in 2010, the muscle had very low carbon-14. Fascinating stuff. So we know, going way back on track, as you get older, the fat cells slow down. The turnover slows down. So you're predisposed to basically store more fat. But then the complete flip side of that is, after different numbers quoted, but after 45, 50, we get sarcopenia, where our ability to maintain muscle goes down. So it's this double-sided coin where your body naturally, and for some people it's different rates, there's individual differences. Some people, your body wants to get rid of fat slower, and it's also getting rid of muscle. Muscles very, very metabolically active. So that's what's keeping your basal metabolic rate up. So on our stream analogy, it doesn't make it impossible to lose weight, but it does mean that it would have been probably slightly easier metabolically to lose weight when you were 25 compared to when you're 55.
It just makes it much harder, basically. In summary, the older you get, the harder it is to achieve weight loss goals and also to maintain. And that makes sense to how we kind of get it as society. It's like people always say, God, as I get older, I've noticed that I've put on a bit of weight. I haven't really changed much. And when I tried to lose weight, it was really hard. Yeah. So scientifically, that is the proof of it, right? That's what you've just demonstrated by referencing the Cold War, is that we now know that there is some truth to the fact that as you get older, it's harder. Yeah. And therefore, you're going to have to swim all day. But
if we look at it epidemiologically, so like at the public health level as well, as you get older, pick up comorbidities, medications, social commitments that reduce activity, change your dietary input, injuries, surgeries that reduce your physical activity options. So basically, constant stones being thrown, lowering your chance of optimal weight management. And then in later years beyond that, weight management flips from the last thing we want a lot of 80, 90-year-olds is to lose weight, because frailty then becomes, for the most part, an option. We want to put on weight because they've lost muscle mass, they've lost bone density. So then that weight management curve, we're trying to get, and then appetite's way down. People of that age report that they don't have an appetite to eat much. So they end up in a really huge calorie deficit because they just don't feel like eating much. So it is a weight management is an issue over the whole life course.
Super interesting. And we've been quite careful to try and cover different ways of expressing this and different ways of communicating it, and language in particular. I know this is something that you think a lot about, because the stigma attached to this conversation has the potential to be the opposite of helpful, has the potential to derail someone's efforts, to put them off of working at it. So how do we, as let's be frank, like two slim healthcare providers who have the knowledge already and have started our journey of weight management very early, how do we be careful not to patronize, to put people off and send them down on a negative spiral?
Weight stigma is a topic I'm incredibly passionate about. So we know very well a lot of people who are living with overweight and obesity report having stigmatized experiences, not just in healthcare, but all sorts in public transport. And that has been well shown. That then leads to basically further adverse effects on their weight management. When it comes to, as you mentioned, with healthcare, so I know hopefully a lot of clinicians listening to this, it's repeatedly shown amongst physios, healthcare professionals, that patients who are overweight or obese feel they're being stigmatized. The crucial thing is being aware of this and mitigating it. So there's two different types. There's implicit and explicit weight stigma. So explicit weight stigma is like categorically kind of things you would know as unacceptable, like, making derogatory remarks, things like that. And this is amazingly still common, but probably what's more pervasive and more of an issue is the implicit weight stigma. So this is sometimes slightly below the surface healthcare clinicians' belief that people who are overweight are lazy, that they've got no willpower, that they're not gonna, already as soon as they walk into the room thinking, if this person's overweight, they're not going to stick to the plan so well. This is incredibly pervasive. So we need to champion the fact that as a healthcare professional, when you meet someone, you are meeting them at this roundabout. Your job is to learn everything about their road up to the roundabout, and in no way to judge what has happened up till there. And for a lot of people nowadays, they might be living with overweight or obesity. So little things you can do. First of all, is for us, like you mentioned, if we're relative, we can't empathize. So bring that up, show awareness. Don't blanket go to the point. Say, look, ask, is it okay if we talk about weight management? I know it's a tough subject, and I've had people before where they've come to me with osteoarthritis of the knee, and I say that weight management's a key part. Is it okay if we talk about how I could help you with weight management? They go, actually, it's a really touchy subject. I don't want to talk about it. Okay, that's fine. A couple of weeks later, they come back and say, I'm ready to talk about it now because I know it might help. So the key things for clinicians listening is be aware that weight stigma in healthcare is a real thing. Be aware that patients that you meet who are overweight or obese likely in previous healthcare encounters have experienced either explicit or implicit weight stigma. And so their view, their personal reality on healthcare might be very different to yours, right? It's very natural for us. We were physios, we went to physio course at uni. You go into a big room, everyone takes their t-shirt off and you all draw things like it's not very alien. Put yourself in their shoes. They may feel uncomfortable, not happy in their body. They've been to healthcare professionals before who have made brief remarks like, oh, it would help if you lost weight. Or, oh yeah, if you're not so fat, then that would reduce your chance of knee pain. And they're meeting you, who is a stranger. You might ask them to, show parts of their body so that you can assess it. So be really understanding and considerate to their viewpoint on the same encounter, because it could be a flip 180 difference to yours. Make sure you always ask permission before speaking about it. You explain how you can help. So whether that's signposting to weight management support groups, to a dietitian, explain the role you can, and always the key thing is link it back to, so if they came to see you and I, you are linking it back to the reason they came to see you. So if a person goes in to see their doctor or their physio because yesterday their foot rolled off a curb and they've got a lateral ankle sprain and they are living with overweight or obesity, the fact that they are living with obesity has got nothing to do with that they tripped over a curb. They've come to see you about their ankle, and if a physio mentions weight management or weight loss, I would be pretty confident saying you're in the wrong. It's got nothing to do with it. If they're coming to you about osteoarthritis of the knee, right, well, now we know there's really good evidence as to how this can feed into it. So bring it up. That would be my guidance.
And I actually think that's worth exploring a little more here for both clinicians and non-clinicians. What is it about overweight, obesity that does contribute to the increased risk of osteoarthritis?
Yeah. Oh, this is my passion. No, I'm talking. So, twofold. We're talking about this graph of weight management over time. If your weight is too high for a long period, there's the two main factors that feed in with osteoarthritis. I know you spoke about this with Kash Akhtar in a previous podcast, but very briefly, osteoarthritis is changes within an articular joint, hip, knee, shoulder, wherever, loss of cartilage, but associated bone changes in the synovium. When you are living with excess adipose tissue, high BMI, high fat tissue, first and foremost, this has this inflammatory effect. So adipose tissue it's not innate. It's not your clothes that you're just carrying. It's contributing to the big macro environment of the body, and the joint, let's say knee, is the micro environment. So body fat, when it's at healthier levels, it's actually slightly anti-inflammatory. So it's contributing to the environment. As the adipocytes, the fat cells, get hypertrophic, so they get bigger, they get more of them, they crowd each other, and this causes adipokines, cytokines. These are pro-inflammatory these then basically are harmful to the microenvironment of the joint. This is very, very clear. The loading part, and I think this is one part where the pendulum maybe had swung a little bit too far the other way. So say 20, 30 years ago, it was very much OA is a wear and tear disease, like tyres of a car, your cartilage wears out. And then it went and flipped opposite pendulum. It's not wear and tear. It's got nothing to do with wear and tear. And I think probably the answer is the pendulum sits in the middle with the mechanics. To quote a person I think very highly of, Tonya Vincent. She's been on a number of podcasts. The observation she made when I've listened to her speak many times about it, and she's like, actually, if we look at all the factors, weights, exercise, diet, smoking, all of it, the common factor with all the people that come in with osteoarthritis is that their joints are moving and there is load going through the joint. And so she made the point that if you're paralyzed and there is no movement through that joint, it doesn't matter how much you smoke, how much you weigh, you won't get osteoarthritis in the joint. So loading of the joint has to be the underpinning factor. With living with overweight or obesity, there's a couple of small cohorts that I'm aware of. MacLean is one, Harding is the other. They're the first authors, and they found that people with overweight or obesity have greater shear forces during gait, greater knee adduction moment. So in essence, a less stable knee that further propagates it and accelerates it. So it's a dual-pronged sword. There's this macro-inflammatory environment plus these biomechanical changes, which together are pulling on the levers and accelerating this osteoarthritic progression.
So it depends on the individual. So you can have both an increase. So someone who's got a good load capacity of their body, strong muscles, they might be overweight or obese, but they've got low inflammation, for example, relatively low, and also high capacity. So, and they might cope really well and have less chance of arthritis. You might also have someone who isn't overweight and obese, but has other reasons why they might be systemically inflamed.
Yeah. And
that might contribute to reduced load capacity because the cartilage is unhealthy. So it could depend on the person. I think that's really helpful, is that both factors are important.
Yeah.
Systemically, both inflammatory wise, but also biomechanically, it seems to matter. So you can't really just label it with one thing. All the factors are relevant here. And
my the best way I've ever seen it described is a author called Andriaki, and they proposed a systems model to osteoarthritis. So think of it as like a system. Osteoarthritis progressing almost like a treadmill, and there are levers that are determining the speed that the treadmill is going at. So one lever is biology, so that would be inflammation, and you have this metaphorical slider that's on a disc, and when that slider goes, outside of normal homeostatic range, that lever just starts to get pulled, which speeds it up. You have another lever which is biomechanics. So if they have a gait that means that they are slightly unstable, or they who do have repeated instability, then that starts to just pull that lever. And the more and more that lever gets pulled, the faster and faster it accelerates. Joint structure. So if someone has a big injury, we know, intra-articular injury, massive increase in risk of osteoarthritis in the knee. That's pulling that lever and speeding it along. So there's many, many different levers that could be pulled or slowed, and it's probably impossible to turn them all on or all off. You just want to do your best to keep it all. It's metaphorical, of course, it's a model, but hypothetical.
Well, one of these levers that some people will be aware of and are hearing a lot about is the Ozempic lever.
Yeah.
And the Ozempic lever, to me, is like the equivalent of someone having a speedboat come down the river, pick them up, and help them a bit further up the river.
Yeah.
So it seems to be incredibly effective at helping people lose weight.
Yeah.
As a result, does that mean we should be advising people to take Ozempic who are having trouble losing weight?
it's a really good point. And so Ozempic, also Wegovy, same thing, semaglutide, just different trade names. The thing that I'm still getting my head around is there's the risks of being overweight and obese, and then there's the potential risks of taking the medication. And for some people, the potential risks of medication are way less than the risks of being obese. So actually, in that sense, taking semaglutide, Ozempic, could be a potential option for osteoarthritis. Definitely. I'm not aware of any trial or study yet, I'm sure there will be, that's looked at it in relation to symptomatic osteoarthritis. And there's no reason why not. Thinking longer term, you can't take it forever, as far as I'm aware. I think 2 years is pretty much the max you're supposed to take it for. And from all the reading I've done, it seems once you stop taking Ozempic, the same, a small 10 to 15 odd % cohort maintain that weight loss, and others kind of yo-yo back up. So are we changing that yo-yo from small regular yo-yos to one big massive one? I don't know. But for the osteoarthritis piece, potentially it could be really useful.
And look, maybe for those 10, 15%, that's the difference maker that they couldn't get beforehand.
Yeah.
And I think people just knowing that fact could help. Just knowing the fact that 10, 15% of the people will maintain, the rest will bounce back. Knowing that might increase it to 20, 25, right? Because they're like, well, I don't want to be one of the people that bounce back. And maybe they realize then it's this kind of gateway into lifestyle change, and hopefully that, I don't know, maybe that's also what it is. It's like this gateway and educational piece of like, I don't want to be the person that bounces back.
Yeah. I think that's tough. My understanding with Ozempic is it's a GLP-1 agonist, right? So it makes you feel, it hugely reduces it's a satiety, it hugely reduces your appetite. My worry would be is once you stop taking it, are you suddenly then going to be really sensitive and then your appetite shoots back up? Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure anyone really knows the answer to that. It's at the moment, everyone's talking about it, and it sounds like everybody in Hollywood's on it for losing weight. But for a lot of people, it's going to be an option. But if we revert it back to an hour or so ago, the societal measure, we've got this obesogenic environment, the societal problem. By just injecting something to reduce everybody's appetite, are we really fixing the problem? Like, is that because if that is the solution, then that means every generation from now on, we're going to go, right, we're going to make humans adapt their physiology to fit the environment. Does that make sense?
We're going to keep plastering over the crack.
Exactly.
Hope the crack doesn't widen. We'll just find a bigger and bigger plaster.
Yeah, the interesting thing I heard about Ozempic is the potential other repercussions, stock in Nestle and stuff going down because no one will want it. So I guess one potential positive, this is me just thinking out loud here, is great percentage of the population in the Western world start taking Ozempic. Therefore, the demand for a lot of food goes down. And the reason that those foods were created was to drive a profit. So that won't happen anymore because they'll be making a loss if they keep making it, because not as many people will be buying it. So it could then change the demands of the environment in that way.
Yeah. And look, I think what we've realized through the conversation is that there is a huge societal problem that should be solved at a governmental policy, societal level in order to fix it long term. But for individuals who do want to change, there's also ways that they